Welcome to The Explainer. I am absolutely thrilled you're here today because we are going to dive into one of the most fascinating and frankly, deeply terrifying modern legends to ever come out of the American South. We're talking about the infamous lizard man of Scape Swamp. Now, right off the bat, I want you to completely forget the cheap tourist t-shirts and the goofy local festival mascots you might have seen floating around online. Just wipe them from your mind. Instead, I want you to step back with me into the rural, stiflingly hot summer of 1988. We're going to a place where the shadows are super long, the water is pitch black, and the things that go bump in the night leave actual twisted metal in their wake. In this explainer, we are going to explore the genuinely terrifying origins of this local legend, and then we are going to completely dismantle it. We're going to gut this legend piece by piece to reveal a truth that is actually so much more profound and heartbreaking than a swamp monster. So let's just get right into it.
I want you to just imagine this for a second. It's 2 in the morning in Lee County, South Carolina. The air outside is incredibly heavy. It's thick with that suffocating southern humidity and the unmistakable smell of stagnant swamp water. You are completely alone on a desolate, unlit dirt road that borders the Scape Swamp. And if you don't know it, this is a sprawling 4,000-acre labyrinth of dead cypress trees, tangled vines, and slow-moving black water that's stained completely dark by tannins. It's creepy. The only sounds you hear are the hum of katydids, the low croak of bullfrogs, and the crunch of your own tires on the asphalt. And then, suddenly, bang! A tire blows out. You literally have no choice but to pull over into the absolute pitch blackness. You step out of the relative safety of your car. You're completely vulnerable out there. And as you kneel down in the dirt to change this tire, you hear a rustling sound in the tall reeds just a few feet away. And it's not a squirrel, it's not a deer. The sound is heavy, it's deliberate. And as you slowly look up into the tree line, you see 2 glowing, piercing red eyes staring right back at you from the darkness.
Section 1. Terror in the Swamp. The night of June 29, 1988.
Okay, let's dive into this timeline because that horrifying scenario I just described, that isn't from some B-list horror movie. It is exactly what 17-year-old Christopher Davis experienced. He was driving home from a late shift at a fast food restaurant when he had to stop to fix a flat. Out there in the absolute dark, at about 2:15 a.m., he heard a heavy thumping noise from the tree line right behind him. He turned around and what he saw emerging from the blackness literally made his blood run cold. It was a massive figure and it was running directly at him. Davis panicked. He bolted for his 1976 Toyota Celica, threw himself inside and frantically locked the doors. But the creature was unbelievably fast. Just 5 minutes later, as Davis slammed on the gas to escape, this terrifying entity lunged out of the dark, grabbed the door handle, and then, no joke, actually jumped onto the roof of his moving car. Imagine that. Davis was swerving his car wildly from side to side in the dark in a desperate bid to throw this massive creature off into the road.
The sheer terror of that moment is captured perfectly in Christopher Davis's official police testimony. Listen to this description. "I could see him from the neck down. The 3 big fingers, long black nails, and green, rough skin. It was strong and angry." He went on to describe the monster as being roughly 7 feet tall, glistening as if it was completely soaked from the swamp water, covered in snake-like scales, and possessing this incredible violent strength. He even claimed he could hear the thing grunting above him as its 3-fingered claws curled right over his front windshield while he was driving. Just absolutely terrifying.
Now, if this were just a teenager telling a spooky story to avoid getting in trouble with his parents for reckless driving or something, it probably would have just ended right there. But here is the absolute crucial point we have to understand. There was physical evidence. This wasn't just a story. Sheriff Liston Truesdale, who was a highly respected, no-nonsense local lawman, personally investigated Davis's car. And he didn't just find a few minor dents. He found deep, jagged scratches gouged straight into the metal roof. The side view mirror was utterly mangled, like it had been ripped apart. There were actual bite marks gouged right into the hard metal door frame, and even more chilling, when deputies went out and searched the swamp's edge the next day, they discovered massive 14-inch, 3-toed footprints pressed deep into the muddy banks. They even went so far as to make plaster casts of these bizarre tracks, and when they brought in local biologists to look at them, the biologists stated they were completely unclassifiable. They didn't match any known animal in the area. So something incredibly strong and incredibly angry had genuinely attacked that car in the middle of the night.
Section 2. Lizard mania strikes Bishopville, an epidemic of fear.
Within days of that initial attack, the story leaked out of the sheriff's office and hit the local papers. And almost overnight, the tiny town of Bishopville plunged into absolute chaos. $1 million That was the massive reward offered by a nearby Columbia radio station, WCOS, to anybody who could capture the creature alive. Now think about that. $1 million in 1988 for a rural town? The stakes were suddenly sky high, and it was basically like throwing gasoline onto a roaring fire of local panic.
And this brilliantly illustrates how fast panic spreads, because with a literal monster on the loose and $1 million bounty on its head, the floodgates just blew open. Perfectly normal, rational people suddenly started seeing monsters everywhere they looked. Dozens of locals woke up to find their own cars mutilated. Chrome trim was literally chewed off. Thick wires were ripped right out of the engine blocks. Heavy metal fenders were completely bent. It was wild. Out on the highway, 3 massive 40-gallon cardboard drums were found completely smashed to pieces in the middle of the road. A local farmer reported his heavy-duty tractor was heavily scratched up, and it was surrounded by those exact same terrifying 3-toed prints in the dirt. People all over town were calling the police, reporting guttural hissing sounds near their boat docks and seeing glowing red eyes in the brush. The fear was absolutely contagious.
To put that into perspective, this localized fear rapidly turned into a full-blown global spectacle. Over the course of that summer, an estimated 50,000 people descended on Bishopsville. Now remember, this was a quiet little town of only about 3,500 residents. That's enough people to fill a major sports stadium, flooding into a tiny rural community. The 2-lane roads surrounding Scape or Swamp were completely clogged. You had international television crews from all over the world, casual curiosity seekers, and, most alarmingly, heavily armed amateur monster hunters wading into the dark swamp waters with loaded shotguns, desperate to claim that $1 million bounty. It was a terrifying, volatile mix of genuine local panic and massive outside exploitation.
Section 3. Anatomy of a Hoax. Unmasking the Monster.
But as the humid summer heat eventually broke, so did the illusion. It's time to look past the glowing red eyes, systematically dismantle this physical evidence, and unmask the real monsters lurking in Scape or Swamp. Let's look at the hoaxers who were actively trying to keep the terror alive for their own amusement or fame. First up, we have Kenneth Orr. He was an airman who literally walked into the police station claiming he had shot the lizard man. He even slammed physical evidence down on the desk, a vial of blood, and some mysterious, slimy scales. Well, the reality, Sheriff Truesdale took one look and quickly identified the scales as belonging to a local fish. Orr eventually confessed he made the whole thing up just to keep the legend in circulation, and he was promptly charged with filing a false police report. Then there's the incredibly hilarious case of Lucius Elmore. Locals were calling the cops terrified by a hissing monster near his rural property. The reality, Lucius was just a local butterbean farmer who was sick and tired of people stealing his window air conditioning units in the middle of the night. So he sewed dried butterbean shells onto burlap sacks so they would rattle and hiss in the wind to scare away thieves. It wasn't a monster, it was literally just noisy vegetables.
So the crucial point here is that when you strip away the hysteria, you are left with a very stark contrast. On one side, you have the myth, pushed heavily by amateur cryptozoologists, that a surviving theropod dinosaur or some sort of mutant reptilian humanoid was secretly living in the South Carolina swamps. And on the other side, you have the rational reality. Locals pulling pranks in rubber monster suits, farmers protecting their butterbeans, and, most importantly, basic biology. Experts agree that many of the actual sightings in the dark were likely misidentified American black bears. Bears are being displaced from their habitats all the time, and when a black bear stands up on its hind legs in the pitch black, it can look incredibly strange, tall, and imposing.
Section 4. Monsters of the Mind. The Psychological Reality.
So, if the monster wasn't a biological reality, why did so many upstanding, totally normal people genuinely believe they were being hunted? To understand that, we have to look at the monsters of the mind. This brings us to a really powerful psychological concept: mass hysteria. This is a phenomenon that transmits collective illusions of threats through a population as a result of rumors and fear. It's essentially a mind virus. When Christopher Davis's genuinely terrifying story was blasted across the evening news, it planted a seed in the community's subconscious. Suddenly, every bump in the night, every weird shadow in the swamp, and every strange rustling noise wasn't just the wind anymore, it was the lizard man. People's brains, which were already primed by fear and anticipation, just began filling in the blanks with scales, claws, and glowing red eyes.
But wait, I know exactly what you're wondering right now. If the monster was just mass hysteria and a few guys in rubber suits, what about the mangled cars? What about the chewed-up fenders, the deep scratches, and the ripped-out engine wiring? Because mass hysteria cannot physically bite through solid chrome, right? I want you to ask yourself, what mundane, real-world creature actually has the sheer jaw strength and the chaotic energy to completely tear apart a vehicle in the dead of night? The terrifying truth is actually much more grounded, but still pretty scary. The real culprits were black bears losing their natural habitats due to local land development and, far more commonly, massive packs of wild feral dogs. And we actually have modern scientific proof of this. Decades later, in 2008, another vehicle in Bishopville was viciously attacked in the exact same manner. The fenders were chewed up, the head metal was crushed like paper. People immediately blamed the lizard man, but this time investigators collected blood and saliva traces left behind on the jagged metal. They sent it off to a lab for DNA testing, and guess what? The results didn't come back as an unknown mutant reptile. The DNA belonged to a domestic canine. Feral dogs, likely trying to get at a cat or a raccoon hiding up under the warm hood of the car, possess enough desperate, frantic strength to literally chew apart a car's exterior. Mystery solved.
Section 5. The monster they needed. The socioeconomic reveal.
Okay, so we've debunked the physical monster, and we've explained the psychological terror. But to truly understand why this legend became so massive, we have to change our perspective entirely. We have to look at the true monster in this story, and the real reason Bishopville completely refused to let the legend die. $21,000. Now, what's really interesting about this slide is that this was the median household income in Bishopville, South Carolina around that era. To put that into perspective for you, that is nearly twice as low as the median income for the rest of the state. This wasn't just a quiet, sleepy town. This was a town that was drowning in severe, generational economic depression.
As you can see, the reality was incredibly grim. Nearly half, 46%, of Bishopville's residents were living below the poverty line. Bishopville originally built its wealth as a cotton town, but as the agricultural industry shifted and declined over the decades, the town was completely left behind. There was barely any money for education, there was absolutely no capital to entice new, modern industries to build factories there, there was a stark racial and economic divide, and the town was desperately stuck in a cycle of economic hardship with absolutely no lifeline in sight. They were fading off the map.
And this is where the story gets brilliant. Bishopville didn't just suffer through the lizard man panic, they weaponized him. When the national media descended on the swamp in 1988, local business leaders quickly realized something profound. They needed something unique to lift their town out of despair, and this terrifying swamp monster was actually the perfect economic engine. It was a gold mine. They managed to turn a terrifying monster into a literal community savior.
Let's move to this next slide and see how this builds, because the community aggressively commodified this cryptid. They established the annual Lizard Man Stomp Festival, which brought in thousands of vital tourist dollars every single year. The local South Carolina Cotton Museum actually installed a permanent Lizard Man exhibit, cleverly using the monster as bait to get tourists in the door so they could then teach them about the region's actual agricultural history. Local mom-and-pop stops sold out of t-shirts, mugs, and cheap trinkets. They even created a cute little mascot, the Lee Litter Lizard, using the monster to encourage local children to participate in community pride and environmental cleanup projects. The monster brought in money, it brought pride, and it brought unity to a place that desperately needed all three.
The reason this legend survives today is probably best explained by communication professor Robert Westerfelhaus, who noted, absent the lizard man claims, people from New York, Chicago, and London would not be coming to Lee County SC. And he hit the nail on the head. The legend put a forgotten, struggling rural town on the global map. It gave them a brand. It gave them a voice when no one else was listening. The Lizard Man wasn't a curse on Bishopville. He was literally the greatest marketing campaign Lee County ever had.
So as we wrap up this explainer, when we look at urban legends and folklore like this, we really have to ask ourselves a deeper question. Do we create monsters because we are terrified of what hides out there in the dark, murky swamp waters? Or do we create them because sometimes an isolated, struggling community simply needs a monster to come along and save them? It completely changes how you view a spooky story, doesn't it? Thank you so much for joining me today as we explored the incredible, multifaceted truth behind the Lizard Man of Scape or Swamp. Keep asking those questions, keep looking past the myths, and I will catch you in the next explainer.